Welcome back. You're watching our live and continuing coverage of the Prime Minister's exclusive interview to India Today magazine. This is his first interview post demonetization, and I want to focus now on the political dimensions of demonetization. One of the critical things the Prime Minister says, he says we are actually 40 years late in this decision, and he illustrates this with a quote. And I want to take you through what he's told our editorial director Raj Chengappa. He says, this further highlights the reality that the minds of the Congress leaders are entirely preoccupied with only one thing, which is elections. This is the case while they're in opposition. It's also the case while they're in government all these years. To illustrate my point, let me quote former Home Secretary Madhav Godbole's book, Unfinished Innings. He says, in this book, Reflections and Recollections of a Civil Servant, as Private Secretary to then Finance Minister Y.B. Chavan, he described his minister's interaction regarding demonetization with then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. When Y.B. Chavan told her about the proposal for demonetization and his view that it should be accepted and implemented forthwith, she asked Chavan only one question. Now listen carefully to what I say next. Chavan ji, are no more elections to be fought by the Congress party? Chavan got the message and the recommendation was shelved. We are actually 40 years late in this decision. So he's essentially suggesting, Raj, that this should have been done 40 years ago after the 71 war, and Indira Gandhi should have done it, but they didn't because they were worried about electoral results.
You know, while I was interviewing him, I could sense the frustration on this particular aspect that he talked about, that the fact that we should have done it much earlier. And secondly, in Parliament as well, his disappointment that the Parliament was not allowed to function and he was not allowed to give his version of the entire demonetization drive that he had started. You could also, you know, he did mention that he was very keen that they bring in radical reform in terms of politics and the way elections are held. And, you know, in some senses, that's the head of the snake, if you look at it. That's where the fount of corruption begins. And if you were able to, in some senses, restrict that, down the line, you would see a dramatic change. And that is something that this government and possibly, you know, all politicians put together will have to address pretty quickly.
Sanjay Jha, the Prime Minister says, if I were guided by short-term electoral politics, I would have never done so. For us in the BJP, the nation is above the party. We've always lived by the principle of keeping a long-term national interest over short-term political benefit. There is nothing political in the decision of demonetization. It was a tough decision taken to clean up our economy and our society. He says Indira Gandhi should have done it in the 70s. Sanjay.
Well, let me tell you one thing, Rahul. Demonetization was anyway done before, right? It's been done twice before. And incidentally, Mr. Vajpayee's government was part of it as well. I mean, what results did you have? I mean, you know, a rudimentary study of economics will tell you that demonetization is one amongst multiple steps the country needs to take to attack black money and corruption. You have had the Supreme Court, by the way, telling Mr. Modi's government, why are you so remarkably ineffective in implementing the Lokpal, which was, by the way, passed by the Congress and the UPA in 2013. 4 years have gone, and the anti-corruption infrastructure is lying dead in cold storage. That will tell you the real intention of Mr. Modi's government on corruption. And I think the bigger point, Rahul, is this, that, you know, end of day, why I think it is nothing but a political statement that Mr. Modi made on the 8th is because when you take an economic decision, you have to have the necessary wherewithal to know what the repercussions are going to be. Clearly, he was unprepared. I mean, I consider demonetization to be the biggest governance and operational failure since 1947.
Okay, Sanjay has made an important point. Let Sambit respond. Take the Lokpal Act, for example.
Look at
the Act has been passed. We still don't have Lokpal. If the Prime Minister was serious about taking on corruption, by now we should have had an anti-corruption ombudsman.
See, that would be a diversionary tactics if we go into that debate.
No, why is it diversionary? Is the Lokpal not an important anti-corruption ombudsman?
I would answer that as well. As I told, I would answer that question as well.
So the Supreme Court
government has replied to the Supreme Court. Just a second. The government has replied to the Supreme Court that there were issues about the LOP because there is no designate LOP, and surely the government will look into it, will resolve the case, and very soon we will have the constitutional post filled. But coming to this demonetization, there are 2 or 3 questions which have cropped up, and I want to answer those. You drew Manmohan Singh ji, and in fact Mr. Sanjay Jha also has been drawing a lot of inspiration from an able man, Mr. Manmohan Singh ji, who is respected. But all said and done, in the interview also Mr. Manmohan Singh's name crops up, and let me quote what the Prime Minister said. The Prime Minister said that despite our respect for Manmohan Singh, and despite the fact that Manmohan Singh stayed in the economic forefront not just for 10 years or the finance minister before that, but for 45 long years on different posts. In fact, he was the steering force behind the Indian economy. Despite all that, Indian economy was not doing well. Remember, he inherited an 8.4% GDP from Bajpayee ji and ended up with just the opposite, that is 4.8% GDP growth rate. So definitely he may be a good person. Despite being an economist, he was probably
Sanjay, respond to that.
I
I want to quote what the Prime Minister says. The Prime Minister says the words monumental mismanagement come from a leader who's been at the helm of India's economic journey for 45 years, from Chief Economic Advisor to DEA Secretary, RBI Governor, Planning Commission Deputy Chairman, Finance Minister and Prime Minister. All the while during which large sections of our society have continued to live in poverty and deprivation. The Prime Minister does have a strong point there, Sanjay.
Well, let me tell you, Mr. Modi's answered the question himself. The very fact that you have a man in Dr. Manmohan Singh, about whom President Barack Obama said that when he used to be there in the G20 summits and spoke on economic policies that the world had to grapple with, everyone listened. And the reasons for that was, one, an established track record. We all know, Rahul, that 1991 was the defining year post-independence, that India's economic fortunes changed, and one man, singularly, who took the call was Dr. Manmohan Singh himself. So if Mr. Modi really wants to respond to the criticism of Dr. Manmohan Singh's speech in Parliament, calling the demonetized decision a monumental failure, you should take that seriously. Now, as regards, trying to spin poverty and literacy and health issues, the truth is, and that's the reality, we are still a developing country with enormous challenges. I don't blame our government. I don't blame Mr. Vajpayee's government. I don't even blame Mr. Morarji Desai's government. I think for every government, it's a gargantuan task. It's a work in progress. So bottom line, all I would like to tell Mr. Modi is, when you are trying to make political capital on an economic decision, please realize the ramifications of those if you are doing it purely for a time-bound election. You don't do that.
So let me put this question. Finally, to our political roundtable, I want to put this question.
Into a deep soup.
Has the opposition failed to calculate people's support towards demonetization, or is the BJP overestimating public support? Let me put that question first to Raj Chengappa. Is demonetization bad economics but good politics, or do you believe it's good politics and good economics?
Listening to the Prime Minister, he has a clarity about him, and he thinks it's both. That economically, while there'll be a downturn because of the sucking out of so much cash, this would actually bring back a lot more cash liquidity into the market and would stimulate growth. I mean, that's the thing. And politically, he's finally addressing key issues. A lot of the middle class and the poor and what he's talking about, they have not come out in protest despite the hardships. Certainly there seems to be, there's been no violence. I mean, a measure of such magnitude, and if there's so much, say, pain for people.
That's a good point. Joey is saying, look at what happened post Nirbhaya. Look at what happened at the time of the corruption scams under the UPA. People were upset to no end. They came out in the streets, there were protests, there were clashes. Now, there have been minor instances of violence being reported from different banks and ATMs, but not of this organized sort that we saw earlier. Is that to suggest that the opposition is miscalculating people's support towards demonetization, Juhi?
We are not miscalculating, and the people are also not miscalculating, because the Prime Minister, the people of India had faith in him till, as you said, the 31st of December. 1st January, his time is over. So whatever he says, he has to remove the hardships. I don't want to use Paytm to pay for my tea, irrespective of what he says on a public platform. I would not like to be
Sambit, I asked you this question earlier. You dodged my bullet, so I will ask it again. The Prime Minister had sought time till the 30th of December. That deadline is about to end. after that,
Yes, it's about to
people's
end.
expectations
And he
could change
himself
because
has said
people
that
are
he's not
hoping
looking for
that the
short-term
situation will
political
resolve.
gains, which he's not
We've heard
going
from
to get
Venkaiah
because the
Naidu, you don't
public
need to
is
listen to
going to
anyone. You know for a
question him.
fact that things won't change in 48 hours. It will take a lot longer for the situation to normalize.
So why say that now?
Naturally, I
Why
was
mislead
also
the
listening
public?
to-
The public believes the Prime
it's a
Minister when he said
it's a
that it
question
would
to me or
end.
a
He
question
did not
to
Sambit
say
Patra,
it.
Sambit
Now
Patra.
the BJP is changing its stance.
But Juhiji is also speaking. Okay, thank you, Juhiji.
I'm
Number
quiet.
one, I was listening to Mr. Yeah, thank you so much, madam. I was listening to Venkaiah-ji, and Venkaiah-ji rightly pointed out that the Prime Minister has said that, well, after 50 days, things will gradually come down to normal. And you would also agree, by and large, things are fast proceeding towards a normal structure. We are seeing line queues thinning out. We are seeing as to how the inconveniences that people faced are gradually coming down. I would still say that there are certain inconveniences which would come down gradually in the coming days, but the Prime Minister said in Hindi, "Dheere dheere karke sab khatam ho jayega." So naturally, it is not a switch on, switch off effect that as soon as it is the bell rings in the midnight of the 50th day, we should start asking questions, and people are intelligent enough to understand this. But the larger point is, why did we all lack the courage for all these years? 1971 till 2016, we all did not have the courage. I blame everyone. We did not have the courage. And today when someone has taken the courage, Rahul, remember before any budget, after Mr. Modi's government, you used to ask us, you have got the kind of mandate for the first time after Rajiv Gandhi's government. Why don't you introduce some big bang reform? Where is the big bang reform? Here
That's
is
true.
the big bang reform.
This was a
today,
Prime
which
Minister
has changed the shape
who in
of
the
Indian
first
economy.
2.5 years built an image as being somebody who would do things incrementally. Suddenly he went and detonated a nuclear bomb, changing that perception altogether. Juhi Singh, Sanjay Jha, Sambit Patra for joining me on the political roundtable. Thank you very much. I'm slipping into a quick break. Union Power Minister and one of the keen movers and shakers of demonetization, Union Power Minister Piyush Goyal is joining us. We'll be to talk about this interview and about demonetization. I'm joined now by Union Power Minister Piyush Goyal. He's been working hard the last 50 days trying to push demonetization through. Welcome, Minister. One of the big points that's been taken up again and again in the last 2 hours during our roundtables on demonetization is this question. I want to put it up on our screen right now. If all the cash in circulation is coming back into the banks, is this then a success or failure of demonetization? Already there are estimates which say that 90% of the cash initially in circulation is back in the banks. Now people are saying you are hoping the 3 or 4 lakh crores will get extinguished. That hasn't happened. The Jugaad factories found ways of pushing it back. Is this then in your view a success or failure of demonetization, Minister?
Rahul, first of all, there was never any estimate of how much money will come or will not come. These are all guess estimates probably by the media. But the important thing is that this money, which for years and years used to be a part of the informal economy, often also used for terror financing or drug financing, also become a medium of transacting for corruption. That money has for once come back into the formal economy, has been recognized by the banking system, and will finally have an ability to trace the source of these funds, the end use of these funds. So I think it's a huge victory for the country. It's a huge victory for Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi that he has been able to, with one stroke, with one historic decision, with the ability to take such a powerful decision, really brought a large part of the informal economy into the banking system. Banking system today is flush with funds, so it can support the economy in a big way. Today the finance minister came out with credible data which reflected how November has shown much better performance than the past. My own office, just as I walked into the room today, put out some figures which I'd love to share with your viewers. Power generation, which had grown only 1.27% in October, is up by 8.53% in November. Coal production, which was minus 2.03% in October, has grown by 5.49% in November. Nalco's aluminium metal production, which was down to a growth of 0.33% in October, has grown by 3.34% in November. Now I'll give you even more exciting data. Copper cathodes in October down 1.14%. is up by 10.35% in November. Lead production down in October by 14%, minus 14, up in November by 30.36%. Distribution companies have increased their collection by 3,000 crores in November as compared to October. Every figure shows that the economy has not suffered. And what I have been saying on many shows before, including on your program, that ultimately when the informal economy gets into the formal economy, it starts getting recognized in the GDP numbers, and it will ultimately help growth far more.
Your critics
than
will
the
say you're
short-term
trying
pain
to
that
talk up the
obviously
economy,
some of us have.
that you're presenting pictures which show that there's been a bit of a bounce back. There are equal number of images, equal number of numbers that are already being put out about how landless laborers are being forced to go back to their villages because they haven't been paid cash salaries. So there are problems as well. So we've done ground reports from several industrial centers of traditional Indian industry where output is down, where laborers are jobless. So there are those numbers as well. You're presenting one side of the story. Is this an attempt to pep up people, make them think that things aren't as bad as they may seem?
Not at all, Rahul. My friend, not at all. After all, who consumes electricity? The largest consumer is the agricultural sector and industry. After all, where do copper cathodes go? Where is aluminium consumed? Where is zinc consumed? All of these indicators only help us to understand that a large part of the economy is now getting recognized in the formal GDP numbers. Certainly, we have taken cognizance of the ground level reports that the media and other well-meaning people have brought out, and we do understand that this effort to clean up has led to a short-term disruption in the trading or the informal economy, but very clearly people are getting used to the fact that they will have to pay by official channels. The digital economy is taking off. Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad was mentioning today, earlier in the day, that he's seen a bump up of nearly 300% in digital transactions. I believe as more and more people get used to transacting through the bank, Amul Dairy, for example, in the first week or two, they were very disturbed. How will they pay for all the milk that they buy? But they were able to open bank accounts and disburse all the payment for milk within the first 10 days through the banking channels. I think this augurs very well for the Indian economy. It will help people go honest, go legit. The Honorable Prime Minister is on record to assuage the concerns that some people had, that their past track record may be opened up, be it in the number of employees they had or the turnover of the past. He has already assuaged the people's concerns. The Income Tax has issued direction under Section 119. The Excise and Service Tax Department, Labour Department have issued out notifications that we would urge everybody to declare their transactions honestly, will not reopen the past if they are willing to turn over a new leaf.
Raj Chengappa has a question for you, Minister.
Piyush, hi. While I was speaking to the Prime Minister on this, he did acknowledge that there's been pain for the common man, and also thank them for their patience and their forbearance. In some senses, tomorrow, December 30th, is time up, or the cutoff point that the opposition leaders who were on TV just before you came on talked about it. Now, some of the sectors that you mentioned certainly have seen growth that you've talked about, but what is the gain that the common man can expect after the deadline is over? What is the kind of relief that he can see for all the pain he's put up in the last 50 days?
Well, very clearly, all of us are on record. I said it in my press conference earlier in the day. I started only by saying that we really are grateful to the people of India. They have stood like rock behind the Prime Minister and his vision to clean up the Indian economy. They have borne the pain with a smile, despite the best efforts of many reporters, including from your channel, if I may venture to suggest, to elicit a response where people would badmouth the government or the Prime Minister's initiative. Despite the pain, we have found that by and large across the country have taken it with a smile. They have supported this effort to clean up the economy of corruption, of black money, to finally give a message to terrorists and drug cartels that there's no tolerance, this government means business. And I believe that all of this leading to a bump up in the economy, leading to better revenue collections, leading to better compliance of laws, leading to better compliance of labor laws, will obviously mean gain for the people. After all, we have all discussed so many times that crores of unorganized labor is not paid minimum wages. We increased minimum wages by 42%. But did the people really get a benefit of that? Is the compliance mechanism across the states adequate enough to really monitor that? But the best way is if
No,
they
but the
have to pay
compliance
through the bank,
mechanism
through
doesn't
digital
suddenly
means,
improve.
the record will be out
You know,
in the
the
open
fact
that everybody gets minimum wages.
But how do you ensure that?
Well,
the
if the
compliance
payment is
mechanism
made
hasn't
not
improved. The
through the
income
bank,
tax
not
department
through
is
cash,
overburdened.
but through the
Each
bank.
officer is telling us that he now has to deal with 100 times the number of cases he deal with in an ordinary year. How does he possibly deal with so many cases in a way that you can catch all distortions?
Well, if it only shows that the truth is coming out, and as the truth comes out, even if we have to bump up the ability of the tax departments to be able to monitor, we are in a position to hire more people. That's the least of our problems. The bigger effort is that as the nation moves more honest, you saw what the Honorable Finance Minister did. He announced that all those who transact digitally and not through cash will have almost a 30% rebate in their tax liability. Their presumptive income instead of 8% will be looked at 6% for traders up to a turnover of 2 crores. I think the effort of the government is to make the whole tax regime more user-friendly, more taxpayer-friendly, and obviously as more and more taxes get paid and revenues are evenly distributed amongst all participants, I would think that naturally it would translate to a benefit to the people in terms of GST rates, in terms of the future tax administration. I think once people get used to transacting honestly and tax base increases, it will obviously help us to look at the entire taxation structure.
What about
and make it more tax friendly, taxpayer friendly, and also trusting towards the honest tax.
Minister, what about the 30th December deadline? The Prime Minister said, give me 50 days. That deadline now around the corner. The situation not completely normalized. How many more days do you think it will take before the situation comes back to normal?
Rahul, a lot of things have happened in the last few days. First of all, the Prime Minister very clearly had articulated that there will be pain for 50 days and then gradually it will start ebbing, and at the earliest we'll try to ensure that everything gets completely normalized in terms of banking. But look at the spin-off benefits that this whole movement has got us. I spoke about the labor, but I could also speak about digital transactions. I'm sure you're aware, and Raj of course would know, having covered business for many years, each cash transaction in the bank, be it in the ATMs, be it at the bank branches, is reported to cost the bank between 55 to 75 rupees every cash transaction. Now instead of that, if more and more of the nation's economy moves digital, goes towards banking channels, the saving in the cash handling alone has been estimated at 21,000 crores in the banking system. We have seen a big bump up in the CASA deposits, the current and savings bank deposits, which means the banks have that much more ability to lend to the formal sector, which means that banks will have an ability to look at resetting their cost of funds because they'll have larger amounts of money surplus to lend, as well as surplus available in the current and savings banks, which is at a lower cost. Now all of these spin-off benefits obviously mean that in the days ahead you will see the gain coming to the people of India. As regards the normal banking, frankly, we have all been monitoring the situation on the ground very closely. We have seen that other than old footage, many of the channels today are putting out old footage. I would appeal to all the channels, including your channel, which is a very responsible news media house, that when you show a footage, kindly also put the date on that footage. You can't show an old footage today and try to create in the people's mind apprehension.
Fair enough. So we hereby undertake that all footage that gets shown from tomorrow will only be the latest footage.
The lines have gone from the banks.
Raj Chengappa has another question.
Piyush, footage of 10 days ago.
No, fair enough. That's a fair point. And obviously, as responsible media, we must also show the images of that day, not of the past. That's a note our producers are taking, and we'll keep that promise. Raj has another question for you.
Piyush, I was checking with you. the Prime Minister, when he talked to me, said that there would be some relief that would be there. And certainly the money that is coming into the banks could see cheaper credit and other sort of benefits and a boost to certain sectors. Where do you think this money can be deployed? And can we see some short-term gains for the general public? I mean, they've gone through all this pain. Do you see relief happening in some forms? I mean, there's a larger thing that will happen over a period of time, but in the short run, can we expect to see something?
Well, I wouldn't be privy to what is in the mind of the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Finance Minister. But, and I haven't had a chance to look at your story as yet. But I would suspect that obviously such large amounts of money coming into the banking system have to be deployed. And to be deployed, they will help boost infrastructure spending. It could also in the short run help boost consumption expenditure. It will obviously help bring down the cost of funds to the banks, on which the banks will have to take a view. After all, in business strategy, what do? If I run a shop and I'm suddenly having a lot of stocks in my shop, I try to excite people to come and buy from my shop by giving them some sops or giving them some advantage to buy from me. So obviously banks also to deploy such large amounts of money, lakhs of crores which have come into the banking system, will need to be deployed. When I took a decision, for example, recently that at this point of time, at the best prices and at the lowest cost of capital, we'll be able to replace all the old coal-based power plants with new plants. And I talked to NTPC and their board was extremely excited. They realized that what would otherwise cost us 7-8 crores, if we intelligently do it today, using low-cost capital which would possibly be available, we could actually do it in 4.5 crores, 5 crores a megawatt. So we are all going to be looking at opportunities. I'm sure the private sector also must be looking at opportunities where using this situation where inflation is at its lowest, interest rates are at their lowest, we can actually build up capacities, build up a better future for the country.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Piyush Goyal, for joining us with your thoughts on the big demonetization interview by India today. Thank you very much. Indicating once again, like Venkaiah Naidu did before him, that the situation will come back to normal sooner than later. That was Union Power Minister Piyush Goyal speaking exclusively to India today. I now want to start the Economists Roundtable. We've heard from the editors, we've heard also from politicians. Now it's time for some of the sharpest number crunchers in the country. Joining us on the broadcast at this time, we've got Ashok Lahiri. Also with us on this broadcast is former banker Meera Sanyal. Nitin Desai is joining us, as also Mohan Guruswamy. We'll talk to them about some of the economic dimensions. We've seen what the Prime Minister is saying. We'll ask them about whether the RBI's institutional credibility has taken a hit. How soon do they believe the economy will bounce back? Also, will demonetization in the longer term horizon prove to be the game changer it is supposed to be? But before that, let's focus for a moment on the Prime Minister's big New Year's address. Remember, my party plans for the 31st are busted, as are party plans in newsrooms across the country, because this morning the Prime Minister's office dropped a minor bomb, not of the kind that we saw at the time of demonetization, a much smaller bomb, but one that upset all calculations, where the Prime Minister said at 7:30 p.m. on the 31st evening, he will be addressing the nation again. Given what he did last time, nobody can afford to be out partying. So what can we expect from this? Take a look at this report.
The PM has a message for you this new year. As we usher in 2017, the government has announced that the Prime Minister will address the nation to give a report card on the demonetization drive and the black money that's been weeded out by this move. The Prime Minister is expected to list out a number of SOPs to give his Digital India a big push. He is likely to announce a relaxation of cash withdrawal limits and a reduction of customs duty on gold. A big relief for farmers could also be in the offing, as the Prime Minister will reportedly announce easier financing loan options for farmers and may even announce a lower income tax rate. Modi will also sound the bugle for a massive campaign by top ministers to highlight how the government has cracked the whip on corruption with a 60-page report. Rallies will be held with ministers listing out the achievements from the dossier. If it will indeed be a report card of the demonetization drive, this will be the Prime Minister's attempt to set the record straight on the impact of the move, echoing what the Finance Minister has outlined.
We have till the 19th of December the direct tax figures of income tax, which are now available, and the net increase in the income tax so far has been to the extent of 14.4%.
But the BJP is playing its cards close to its chest, refusing to divulge details on the Prime Minister's address.
मेरा मानना यह है कि जैसे 8 तारीख को भी लोगों को ये ज्ञान नहीं था, प्रधानमंत्री जी क्या बताएंगे, पर उन्होंने एक नया कदम दिखाया और अब फिर देश की जनता को सीधे संबोधित करेंगे। कोई पहले से तय किया हुआ कोई वक्तव्य नहीं होगा, वास्तव में 1-to-1 संपर्क और जीवन संपर्क होगा और एक नई जानकारी हम सबको मिलेगी।
Opposition has fired at the government time and again over note ban. The government, it seems, wants to make the right impression heading into 2017. And it's a crucial year for the party with 5 state elections in the offing. But the government is maintaining a stoic silence on what the PM's message will be. And come Saturday, 7:30 PM, the suspense will end. In New Delhi, with Bipin, I am Anindya Banerjee for India Today.
You now to the panelists who are joining us for the Economists Roundtable to talk about the Prime Minister's interview to India Today magazine and whether they're satisfied with the economic rationale. Remember, this is the Prime Minister's first interview post-demonetization. I want to begin by introducing first former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, leading economist Ashok Lahiri. With us also Mohan Guruswamy, Chairman of the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Rajiv Kumar is a Senior Fellow at the Centre for Policy Research. Meera Sanyal is the former Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Royal Bank of Scotland. Nitin Desai is a leading economist. Raj Chengappa, our editorial director, who scooped this interview with the Prime Minister. I want to go across first to Ashok Lahiri. You've heard by now what the Prime Minister said. Has he been able to convince the skeptics? Not so much the believers. Do you believe through this interview the naysayers would be won over somewhat more than they were earlier? Dr. Lahiri?